Hi everyone. This is the second part of section 1.5 for Algebra 1A. This is on equation solving, and this video will focus specifically on the two word problem examples that you find in your notes. So number 5 is a very typical type word problem that you're going to find on your worksheets, you're going to find them on your tests, you're going to find them on the SAT, all over the place. So it tells you this little story about Lucinda buying a car, right? Tells you she expects to drive 600 miles per month. And then it gets to the important stuff. And when I say important stuff, I mean the formula, right? They give you this equation for a function. And don't let the fact that it's a function throw you off. It's really just a formula. And it tells us the number of miles she can expect on the odometer at the end of M months. So I know that M represents the number of months, and then the output here, the F of M, is the number of miles that I can expect my odometer to have. So this is F of M, and this is M. Okay? M is the months. That's what I mean to do. And so the reason I point that out is all this stuff in this first sentence, really the first two sentences, are just explaining to you where this equation comes from. And that might be helpful to you, but you don't have to do anything with it because they did the hard work for you. They gave you the equation. Now, I very well could have made you write the equation first and then solve it, but if they give it to you, just dive right in with it, okay? So really both A and B are going to be treated like formula questions. We've got a formula to work with, and our job is to figure out what we have to plug into that formula. So how many miles should Lucinda expect to have on her car after 2 years? Now, this is a measure of time, right? So this is what I'm plugging in for M, but I have to be careful because M is being measured in months. So I have to make sure I think of this in terms of months, and I would say M equals 24 because there's 24 months in 2 years. So this really just becomes a matter of F of M equals 14,000 plus 600 times 24. And then I'm just crunching numbers here. Okay, I don't even really have to solve because the thing I'm solving for is out here by itself. So 14,000 plus 600 times 24, I get 28,400. So at the end of those 24 months, I would expect this to be, let's make sure I got that right, 28,400. That's how many miles should be on the car. Okay, that one was pretty straightforward. And in fact, I think probably most of you could have handled that question without a demo. Let's look at the second one. After how many months? So notice this one is asking for the months, meaning I'm going to be solving for that M value. When will we do for the 40,000 mile checkup? So this thing now is my miles, right? This is going in now for F of M. And what I'm looking for is M. So now the 40,000 is going out here. And here's how this thing relates to your equation solving, because now we're going to solve. But this is a very straightforward one to solve. This is a basic two-step equation. You could have handled this back in junior high. So I'm going to start by subtracting the 14,000. And I believe that's going to give me 26,000. Oh, I messed up my color scheme here. Take my color coding very seriously. This is gone, and then we have 600M. Okay. And then next up, we're going to divide by that 600. Okay. So 26,000 divided by 600, and I end up with 43.3 months. And so I would just probably, because it makes more sense for that to be in a whole number, so I would just say approximately 43 months. If I wanted to turn that back into years, I certainly could. That's like 3.5-ish years, but 43 months would work here, okay? However, 600 miles a month is pretty low, so that might not be super realistic. Okay, this next problem is a good one, and it's one that you're going to need to make sure you understand because you're going to run into it a lot of times. So a farmer grows 3 crops, wheat, corn, and alfalfa, and then it goes into some information about how he divides up his land. Our goal is to figure out how many acres is this total farm, okay? So we're going to start with a technique, and I'm going to make you do this a lot this year, called defining the variable, which means before we even start, we need to define for ourselves what is it that X is going to represent. You can almost always find the answer to that question down here at the end of the problem. The question is, how many acres does the farmer own? So what we want our X to represent is the number of acres. That's our unknown. That's our thing that we're trying to find. And that's of the whole farm. Okay. So we know from the problem that he farms he uses all the acreage for these 3 crops. So our farm is made up of wheat, corn, and alfalfa. Okay. It tells me that he plants 1/3 of the land with wheat. So we have to think about how we're going to represent that. 1/3 of the land, and X is our total land, right? So 1/3 of this is wheat. And so I'm going to represent that as 1/3 X. Okay. Now for corn, corn is 2/5. So this will be 2/5 X. And then the alfalfa, it just tells me is 60 acres. Notice that one's not going to get an X on it because that's not a fraction of anything. It's just a straight up 60 acres. Okay, so wheat, corn, and alfalfa. Now think about what we want to do with these numbers. Doesn't it make sense that we want to add them together because that's how we're going to get our total farm? But before we start doing any math here, we need to think about what does this equal? Okay, well, if I add together the wheat, the corn, and the alfalfa, we know that should equal the entire farm. So think about what we're using to represent the entire farm. That would be X. And this is another place that defining the variable is helpful to you, because as soon as you get to this, you can say, oh, wait a second, I know how to write that. That's just X. So this is the equation that I'm working with. 1/3 X plus 2/5 X plus 60 equals X. Getting the equation set up is half the battle in this question, okay? So if you need to, pause the video for a second and digest. Make sure you understand where that equation came from. Now, solving it is the next battle. And just like we did on the first part of this video, I'm going to use that clearing the fractions technique, which in a question like this I think is really helpful. Could you get away with doing common denominators? Could you get away with a calculator? The calculator is going to be iffy on this one because this is going to be a repeating decimal, and those are really hard to work with in an equation. So I would really recommend you try to latch onto this method I'm about to show you. So I'm going to take the entire equation and multiply it by something that's going to get rid of my denominators. So the denominators I'm looking at are 3 and 5. And so what would cancel with 3 and 5? Well, they both go into 15. So I'm multiplying both sides of the equation, everything in the equation, by 15. So 15 times 1 divided by 3 is going to give me 5. So 15 times 1/3 gives me 5x. 15 times 2 divided by 5, that's 30 divided by 5, which is 6. Now, when you're using this method, you do have to remember you have to do the 15 times the 60 as well. Notice that's not going to get an X on it, but I do have to do 15 times 60, which I'm pretty sure is 900. And then I also have to remember to multiply by this guy over here. So 15 times X would just give me 15X. Now, I know that seemed complicated, but look at how much easier this equation is to solve than this one. Okay, I just basically translated this into a new equation. So now I'm going to put these two together. So I have 11x plus 900 equals 15x. My first goal is to get the x's together, right? So I'm going to subtract this 11x over here. Okay, and I end up with 900 equals 4x. Let's divide by that 4. And I end up with, I believe, 225. And another thing is sometimes we get to the end of a problem like this one and we get this number and we don't know what that 225 really is. But if we've defined our variable, we can refer right back to that. That's the number of acres on the farm. So this is 225 acres, which makes up my entire farm. Okay? So two things to understand about that question. First of all, how to set up the equation, and then how to clear the fractions to be able to solve the equation. You will run into those on your homework assignment tonight. On your quiz review, on the next quiz, you'll be seeing that type of question a lot. Okay? Okay, that's it for lesson 1-5. That should wrap it up. You can go ahead and get started on homework.